Let me give you a hug over.
Last night I had the strangest dream I ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war.
You sound great.
And that's just the warm-up. We'll be doing more singing. If you haven't got a green sheet, get close to somebody with a green sheet. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather and the land we spend our daily lives is the traditional territory of Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. The rest of us newcomers would do well to keep in mind that we're all treaty peoples, and we need to work constantly towards respectful relations with those who lived on this land and cared for these lands long before the rest of us got here. The lands around the Great Lakes are also subject to something called the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Government, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe and the allied nations to peaceably share and care for the land and the resources around the Great Lakes. There's a small, not very clear image at the bottom of the green handout of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt, which is a reminder of our collective responsibility towards the land and towards each other. There's only one dish on the Wampum Belt because we all live and live on and live from the same land. And there's only one spoon because we all have to share those resources among ourselves. In the original Great Peace, they shared beaver tail stew. I couldn't get any today, but there's other things we can share. Also, there's a spoon and a dish. There's no knife. And they said in the Great Peace, there was no knife near the bowl so that nobody could come to the table and harm anybody else because they were gathering peacefully. My name is David. I'm Allison Dent's youngest son. When our family moved into this place in 1968, it was a busy year, 1968, for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. For a working couple with 7 kids and a dog, it was a busy year. They were moving from Ulster, just the other side of college, Ulster and Borden here, to an area where my dad's work buddies at the Continental Can plant said people don't move to Kensington, Dan, people move away from Kensington. But it was true in 1968. It was a place where they could bring a large family that had not just those 7 kids and a dog, but also many hangers-on. But if it wasn't challenging enough, 1968 was also the first time my father ran for public office with that sign back there. The campaign program then, he didn't know it, but it actually reflects the one dish wampum. The campaign program was for housing, peace, and jobs. It was a good program in 1968. Sadly, it's still a very good program today. Not so sadly, just the other day, a very similar manifesto, a little bit more worked out, was a really good program in the general elections in the UK. So, peace and jobs and housing remain with us today. I'd like to begin by introducing Alison Bain, the Executive Director of Heritage Toronto, who helped facilitate the plaque here today. Alison, where are you at?
On behalf of Heritage Toronto, we just want to say thank you so much for allowing us to be part of the project commemorating Alison Dan Heap. On a personal note, I am really honored to be here. Many years ago, when I hitchhiked into Toronto at 16 and ended up living in a house at 20 Robert Street with 8 motley young feminists, Dan was my MP. And the first thing I ever went on when the little small town girl hit the big city was a Dan Heap protest march. So I am really, really honored to be here, personally and on behalf of Heritage Toronto. We wanted to thank Mary Kane, who got this project started and was a master fundraiser. Mary, wherever you are, we need more people like you protecting heritage. At Heritage Toronto, we're committed to increasing public understanding and awareness of the people and the stories that make up Toronto. And as we look at the world stage today, I think that's becoming more important than ever, because remembering the past informs our future, and it helps us build a compassionate city that honors its diversity and where every citizen feels like they have a voice reflected in the history and in the future of Toronto. I encourage all of you to get involved with Heritage Toronto. We're a charity, so we rely on members and donors, and come on our walking tours. This morning we did a walking tour called Kensington Market, Building a Better Life. That goes again July 22nd. And tomorrow we're actually doing a tour with labor historian Craig Herron to learn about the workers' history of Spadina. So we have brochures here on our walking tours that are by donation only. And I hope to see some of you out at our events. And again, thank you so much for including us.
Thank you, Allison. I'd like to introduce next Kathy Crow, street nurse extraordinaire and co-founder of the Toronto Disaster Relief Committee. Kathy.
Co-founder with Don Heap, by the way. So I feel like I'm at a rally, and it is. It also, I also feel like I'm in Don's room at Kensington Gardens with everybody there all at the same time. And it was often like that, actually. So this is a huge legacy of generosity and social justice that we're witnessing and honoring today, including obviously the lives of Don and Alice. I thought of something yesterday when I was telling my grandchildren where I was coming today, and I was telling them about Don and Alice's lives. And the questions that came were like, why, what does that mean? What's a refugee? What do you mean they did that? Or how and why? And it just went on and on and on. And I realized coming here today that I think Canada deserves a children's story about Don and Alice's lives. And I'm not offering to write it. I'm hoping somebody that can get a book published will write it. And I just think that would be a really important legacy. We heard, Joe Cressy and myself heard yesterday about the huge need still for refugee shelters, for homeless shelters in the city. A woman came forward and told story after story after story of the need. And of course, this has been a huge contribution to meet that need in the past. You know, I want people to know, especially Don and Alice's grandchildren and great-grandchildren, that their legacy carries on. And I'm wearing this pin today because I'm wearing it in honor of Don and Alice. This is a Housing Not Worth pin. Talk about timely. I think Don and Alice would have liked to have seen $60 billion go to 20 years of a national housing program, not boosting the military. So I just invite you all to join the anti-war movement in the city and country. And thanks to the amazing family for bringing me here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And when she said very quickly and modestly in Don's room, she was lighting over the fact that for a number of years at the end of Dad's life, up at Kensington Gardens, a few blocks away on College at Augusta, Kathy was one of the people who went faithfully every week to spend time with Dad and read or sing or listen to music or whatever was necessary. And he continued to think about housing and the need for housing into his last days. Normally, we were told by Heritage Toronto that if this was an official Heritage Toronto event, they would have a word from their sponsor. We don't have a word from their sponsor today because we took the other option, the community organized event, because if we had had their corporate sponsor here, we would have had to have a discussion about what Alice and Don thought about the banks. And you wouldn't get off so lightly. So instead of telling you all of that, I'll just say that one of the first political things I remember in the very early 70s when we lived here was going over to Dundas and Bathurst and ending our accounts with the Scotiabank because they were among the first people to invest in Pinochet's Chile. And for a number of years I had a letter from the bank manager explaining why they couldn't pull out of Chile, but I eventually threw it out. But yeah, you can imagine what Alice and Dan thought of banks if you hadn't heard it from them. But we have a better way to talk about banks, which Becca and Alan and Marty are going to bring to us now, and it's the next song on your green sheet.
So remember this, repeat this several times. Okay.
I've traveled around this country, from shore to shining shore. It really made me wonder the things I heard and saw. I saw the weary farmers a-plowing sod and loam, and I heard the auction hammer just a-knocking down their home. But the banks are made of marble, with the guard at every door, and the vaults are soft with silver, that the miners sweated for. I've seen my people working throughout this mighty land. I pray we get together and together make a stand. Then we'll own those banks of marble with no guard at any door. And we'll share those vaults of silver that we all have sweated. Sing it again. Then we'll own those banks of marble.
Thanks, Alan and Becca and Marty. Of course, Dad was a municipal councillor, as some of you know, for this area, for what was then Ward 6. It's gone through a number of transformations, but the type of representation we had then continues today, and we're very happy to welcome Councillor Joe Cressy, councillor now for Ward 20. Joe.
Well, thank you. Listen, if Dan and Alice were here, they would tell us, I'm sure, why the hell are you talking about us? Get on your feet, march down to City Hall, and tell them to open more shelter beds. That's exactly what they would do. My father, who's here, reminded me of a quote that Dan made. He gave to a journalist shortly after he got elected to Parliament. And the journalist said, what's the difference between being a federal politician and a municipal one? And he said, they don't rule me out of order when I talk about world peace. and it's true. Listen, Dan and Alice loomed large in our community. I mean, you just look around and it's a family reunion here, looking at the faces. And they loomed large in many ways. For me, my parents who were here spent every Friday morning at caucus meetings at this house, with many of you as well. I see Dick Gilbert is here and others. For our community, they were a model for how, not just how do you live your lives, but how at all times you fight for what is right. Whether it's in the peace movement or the housing movement, that you always stand on the side of justice. And for me as a young city councillor myself and as an activist, who I started out working with Dan Heap in the Toronto Coalition to Stop War. I remember sitting around the table. He'd fall asleep from time to time, you all remember it. And I remember going home and saying, who is this guy? He has good insight. And my parents reminded me. But for me personally, having the honor to represent the same area that Dan did, they're big shoes to fill. And they're shoes that whether it was Olivia or then Adam Vaughan or then myself, they were shoes to remind us that our task is one to be on the side of justice. And so if I take a moment back to say, what does this plaque mean? What should we all think about in terms of the living legacy of Dan and Alice? It's that you must live your values at all times. That you live your values in the politics and the issues you work on, that in the way you open your house to everybody. How many people lived in this house with you, David? How many people here at one night spent a night in this house? You get a sense that you live your values, whether it's on the streets or in City Hall or in Parliament or in your own home, that you live your values. And today, when there's a lot of uncertainty and frankly inequity and inequality in our city, and it's easy to get down, as it's always been easy to get down when you see how much people are struggling, if you take a moment to say, if we live our values and we model change ourselves indifferently, we will make this world a better place. And that was Dan and Alice always. And so it's just a privilege as the city councillor to help unveil this, but as a new activist in this city to try to live in the shoes that Alice and Dan walked. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Joe. And I remember I helped Alice serve breakfast for those caucus meetings here with Gordon and others. So yeah, there was a lot that happened here, and the doors were never locked. I mean, apparently they locked it once before I can remember, and they couldn't find the keys. So Danny says after that they just didn't lock it. And you meet lots of interesting people that way. Some of them, you know, and some of them you don't. You get to know them. Alice gave them all breakfast, right? And if they stuck around longer than breakfast, they got put to work. So among the people that couldn't be here today, who wanted to be here today, sent some words, was somebody else elected in that early Reform City Council. He didn't come to these caucus meetings, but he was eventually elected mayor. So John Sewell sent these words, former Mayor John Sewell, who was councillor and then mayor. Alice and Dan are memorable figures in Toronto for reasons that are unusual. They're memorable because of the strong moral principles which encompass their deeds and words. There's great power in their principles, power that we remember well. One aspect of speaking was speaking truth to power, not an easy thing to do, as when Dan demonstrated against the Vietnam War in front of the Anglican head office. I think that's technically Synod office or something like that, or church house, but anyway, Anglican head office. Another aspect was being open and welcoming to those who need it. As we know, Alice and Dan literally opened their home to those who needed it. Another aspect was working cooperatively with others on issues of social justice, doing the tiresome drudgery work that is required to have a positive impact on individuals and on organizations. A fourth way was joining with others in political causes that are important but rarely mainstream, causes that are always expressed and reached for our better natures. They created a powerful legacy that we are lucky to be able to honor. One might think that lives based on such serious moral and religious principles might be gloomy and dismal. Not so. Dan and Alice expressed immense happiness almost all of the time. My favorite memory of Dan is from a photograph where the two of us are sitting together on a bench by a wall, and we are both laughing uproariously at who knows what. Looking at the photo always makes me smile, and I realize the great privilege I had of being able to know and work with these two. God bless Dan and Alice. John Sewell. One of the immense joys was to sing. Alice used to say other people sing in tune. She sings in neutral. You're welcome to sing either in neutral or in tune along with the next song, which is one which accompanied Dad into his last days, but we also sang it a long time before. In his last days, he said, there's a verse, the beginning of the third verse, which is one that was added by somebody else. The first couplet has always bothered me, and it turned out it always bothered him, because the tradition, the words that were added say, when tyrants tremble sick with fear and hear their death knell ringing. And Dad didn't think anybody should be sick with fear, even tyrants. And he didn't think, I agree with him, that anybody should face the death penalty, even tyrants. So he said, there's a better verse. You got to go find it. So I went and asked Becca from Holy, she said, go ask at Holy Trinity. I went and asked Becca, who was my friend at Holy Trinity when I was a member of that congregation. We were in confirmation class together. She said, yeah, there's a better line. It's the one that's printed in there. The person who wrote it was my dad. So the couplet that's there at the beginning of the third verse is the one modification added by Don Heap. My life flows on in endless song.
My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn, that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear that music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest loudly roars? I hear the truth it liveth. What though the darkness round me close? Songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. When men and women conquer fear, the prison gates wide swinging, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? In prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging, when friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing?
You sound greater and greater every time. Really good.
So, as was mentioned, a lot of people lived in this house over the years. By the end of the 80s, there were fewer and fewer of us living here. Alice and Don thought it was time to move to a more appropriately right-sized housing for them. Alice believed strongly in not being overhoused. It took a while to move, as you can imagine, a lot of stuff, and especially a lot of papers that ended up at the National Archive in Ottawa, fortunately. But then there's a question of what to do with a house like this, and the story about what Alice wanted to do, and particularly Alice, but both Alice and Don wanted to happen to this house in this neighborhood, which had changed a lot and continues to change a lot, is something that David Walsh, who I saw a minute ago, David Walsh will tell us about. Come up to the mic, David. We all want to hear you. David Walsh negotiated the sale for Homes First Toronto. David.
Thank you, David. Actually, Bill Bosworth and Liz Greaves and others at Homes First were just as much involved as I was. Can you hear? Yeah. Thank you. I was just saying Bill Bosworth and Liz Greaves from Homes First were just as involved as I was, and it took quite a while, to make the transfer, but Alice and Dan were really insistent that they wanted to do it, and as Kathy and Joe and others have said, they were a real inspiration to all of us. We did another house up on Spadina, at 140 Spadina, just before this for refugees. It was a Toronto city house that was left over from the Spadina Expressway. And I went by there this morning just to remind myself it was a house for refugees. And it's still going, which is great to see, but I was kind of disappointed the house next door at 136 Spadina, also a Toronto housing house of 6 bedrooms, is sitting empty. So we really have to keep vigil and follow this example that Dan and Alice set. And on Monday, I understand that a land trust is trying to be set up by the City Council for the scattered houses owned by Toronto Community Housing. So if we're going to keep these houses of Toronto Community Housing, it's really important. And Dan and Alice really set an example for us here, and they were really an inspiration for me. Thank you.
So as I mentioned, international struggles were an important part of my parents' life. And the next song from somebody who was one of the people who spent a night or more here, many nights here, Heather, who went to high school with some of my siblings, and Nano, who was my contemporary when I was in high school, and who we've met again through Beit Zatoun and other cultural venues here in Toronto, are going to bring us Gracias a la Vida by Violeta Parra.
Dos luceros que cuando los abro perfecto distingo lo negro del blanco y en el alto cielo su fondo estrellado y en las multitudes al hombre que yo amo. Gracias a la vida, life gives me so much. It gives life large and small things, 2 eyes to see all things, perfectly distinguish the blackness from whiteness, and in the sky brightness from stars up above me, and in crowded streets I see the one who loves me. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado la marcha de mis pies cansados, con ellos anduve ciudades y charcos, playas y desiertos, montañas y llanos, y la casa tuya, tu calle, tu patio. Gracias a la vida, life gives me so much, my hearing and memory, recording the melody of crickets, canaries, immense hammers pounding, deep thunder resounding, the cries of the starling, the sweet tender voice of my own dear darling. Gracias a la vida, life gives me so much, my tired feet traveling on long roads unraveling, wandering through cities or prairies and mountains, through rivers and fountains, are my sweetest hours on the street where you live, with your house and your flowers. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado la risa y me ha dado el llanto, así yo distingo dicha de quebranto, los dos materiales que forman mi canto y el canto de ustedes que es el mismo canto, y el canto de todos que es mi propio canto. Gracias a la vida, gracias a la vida, gracias a la vida, gracias a la vida.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Becca and Alan, but thank you also Heather and Nano. Music obviously played a large part in what we did here, but also what we did out in the world with Alice and Dan. They were, of course, people of political action, but also people of faith in action. And we were very fortunate at the end of Dad's life in particular. He found it hard to get out to his usual church sometimes, but there was an Anglican church across the street from Kensington Gardens, which was an important sanctuary to him, and where we found an Anglican priest who was very much in the same tradition of faith in action. Mother Maggie Helwig was at Dad's bedside with us when we sang Him Out of This World. She said the Requiem Mass for him, but she's also where Dan and Alice would have been in the front lines, living their faith, defending the land against pipelines, and sitting in, locking down where necessary for the homes for the homeless. So, Mother Maggie Helwig, a few words.
I moved to Toronto in 1984, and Dawn was my city councillor, which seemed like a real recommendation for the neighborhood. And fairly quickly over the years, we became colleagues in far too many organizations to name. One of my very early memories of Toronto is Dawn riding up on his bike to join a bunch of us kids on a street blockade. I don't even remember why we were blockading the street. I'm sure there was some good reason. But Dawn biked over from his constituency office to join us. And he was always there. We worked together in the peace movement. We worked together for housing, anti-poverty work. He was one of the people who, right from the beginning, was supportive of the campaign for independence for East Timor, which was an issue that was a huge part of my life for many years, but which most people had written off as both uninteresting and impossible, and which ended up being one of those really rare times when you actually get a victory in this kind of work. But right from the beginning, when really it seemed like nobody else cared, he was there on that issue as he was on so many others. We were arrested together, I'm not sure how many times, never shared a jail cell because they're pretty strict with the gender segregation in that area. But many things we did together. I was there when he and two other people of faith climbed the fence at Bloor Street, St. Paul's Bloor Street, in an attempt to take the sword off the cross there. Unfortunately, the police caught them as they were coming down the other side of the fence, and the cross still has a sword in the middle of it. But we haven't forgotten that, and we're still talking about when it would be appropriate to have another go at this. So as I later on in my life started to feel that I was drawn to a role in the church, to becoming a priest in the Anglican Church, and really finding it hard to imagine how the Anglican Church could accommodate me. One of the sources of inspiration and comfort for me was knowing that Dawn was there, that every now and then they let one of us through. and then they have to deal with us for the rest of our lives. So it was an inspiration, a colleague, someone I would look at. I would look at Dawn and Alice, who I didn't know as well, but also admired tremendously, still coming to the protests, coming to the meetings, no matter how difficult it got for them physically, and thinking that's my future there, I hope. So when I came to St. Stephen's, and when Dawn started coming here towards the end of his life, when he couldn't always physically make it to Holy Trinity, it was an incredible privilege for me to be able to be even his backup priest, to have that, and to have that role at the end of his life was, I can't even tell you how meaningful it was to me to be able to be there at the very end of life for someone I had so long worked with and so very deeply admired. It was a profoundly important thing for me, and I really thank the Heap family very much for letting me be there. When I preached at the Requiem Mass for Dawn, I preached on the Magnificat. Still not loud enough? Okay. I preached on the Magnificat, the Song of Mary. People don't quite realize how revolutionary a passage that is. People have forgotten how revolutionary the Bible is. It's really not friendly to rich people. But the Magnificat is this extraordinary moment where a teenage girl, pregnant out of wedlock in a society where that usually meant death by stoning, stands up and says, no, I will not accept this, and furthermore, I am going to say that this is the work of God in my life. I will make this the work of God in my life. This will be a sign that the rich will be sent away, that the mighty will be put down from their seats, that the hungry will be fed, that the poor will be lifted up. And it is that fierce revolutionary determination in the face of all the odds that we saw in Dawn and Alice all through their lives, which it was what made them some of the most remarkable people I've ever known. And I hope that those of us who are still here can carry on the work in something of the same spirit. Thank you.
So I keep looking at my timepiece, and I can't believe, I think this may be the first Heap family event I can remember that is not quite ended, but may actually end a little bit before it was supposed to. It's kind of started almost on time, so I'm pinching myself. Thanks to that, so I'm going to do some thank yous now, and then we're going to move around towards where the plaque is for the actual unveiling. I've never done an unveiling before, but I know that the Heritage Toronto staff have done lots of these. And so we'll be there for a photo and for the last number, which has horns, so we don't necessarily need the mics. You have the words for that too. So the last thing I have to do is to thank a bunch of people and apologize in advance because I did this last and I've probably forgotten people. But she's already been mentioned, but I do want to thank again Mary Kane, who had this wonderful idea of having this plaque and also fundraising it from the community. So to Mary, but also to every individual or group that donated to this to make the plaque possible. Thank you very much. We heard about Mary early on from a member of my parents' City Hall team, an early staff member. Ron Stroyce and his late wife, Marie Murphy, were among the team at City Hall early on. I see Gordon nodding, he remembers them. Ron wasn't able to be here today, he really wanted to. Ron helped get the word out to a bunch of people about this. Obviously, I want to thank the musicians. Becca and Alan were part of both of my parents' funeral. Nano and Heather also performed at the funerals. Marty as well was a part of the congregation. So thank you for the music, which is a very important and meaningful part of what we do. Thank you also to Homes First for keeping this building a living part of welcoming newcomers to Toronto who need housing in this neighborhood. And for letting us do this here today in the front yard of these people who didn't necessarily sign up to have all of you come and visit, but I'm sure they're happy to meet you this time. It's an interesting place to live, even when they have locks on the doors now. I'd also like to thank Maggie for her words and for her time spent with Dad and for the work that she does, but also for opening St. Stephen in the Fields Church Hall up the street at 103 Bellevue, right at College. Afterwards, we have more than one dish with more than one spoon. We don't have any beaver tail stew, but we do want you all to come and join us. We haven't sung all the songs. Dad always wanted us to sing all the songs. I don't know what all the songs are, but we will probably sing more songs. We'll eat and have some remembrances. We have some photos of some of the folks that have been mentioned, like John Sewell and others, and Dad and Mom in all the interesting places they went, or some of them anyway. So please, thank you all for coming. Thank you for helping us commemorate this today. Thanks to my siblings who delegated this task to me of generating the text on the plaque and also negotiating it with Heritage Toronto, who have a very fine team of historical writers, and we sort of had this back and forth of everybody knows how much fun it is to edit by committee. So going back and forth, and it's only the 10th version that we finally settled on there. But distilling these two lives into about 190 words was an interesting challenge, but I think we can be very happy with the result. So with that, we're going to move around to the... One.
On the count of three. 3, 2, 1.
At the end of your lives, you'll want to be able to say,
They're still hard to get used to.
that's a nice song. I've never heard it before, even if it's this one. I was there, and Dan said that a lot. That was the last thing that he had was song.
Yeah.
2, 1, 2.
When we make peace
peace instead of war, when we make peace instead of war. Oh, I long to be in that number, when we make peace instead of
Respect for workers' rights.
when there's respect for workers' rights, when there's respect for workers' rights. Oh, I long to be in that number, when respect for workers' rights. Oh, when the air is pure and clean, oh, when the air is pure and clean. Oh, I want to be in that number, when the air is pure and clean.
So thank you all for coming. I forgot to say that. Some of you have come from the neighborhood, which is amazing. Some of you have come from the city, which is amazing. Some of you have come from farther away, which is also amazing. It's lovely to see you. Please join us up the street. My sisters tell me we're going to try to get a picture of family members here, which is always a challenge to try to get family up here together. Harold, that means you come to the front. Folks can come and read the...
Okay.
Oh, we're losing people and we're missing people.
Hector, tell your parents to get up the street.
And then as soon as I heard this was happening, I was like, hell yeah. I finally get an opportunity.
That's awesome, dude.
Some communists.
You know what, there's my most important.
There's a tradition.
That feels like a million years ago.
You just put me with a salesman, except I just got his phone.
What's that?